Hey there, Professor Snart here. I'm just recording a separate video that's more of a lecture type thing, or a little more addressing the readings that we are doing for the course now. So not so much focused on what's being assigned or due dates or that kind of thing, but we've just gotten into our final reading, which is Death of the Salesman, and you would have discovered that there's a lot going on in that play. And one of the things that I always stress when I teach the play, whether it's online or face-to-face or whatever the context is that one of the most common readings that you'll find, or interpretations, will usually identify the American dream, quote unquote, as one of the most fundamental kind of aspects of the play. And this has always bothered me, and I'll explain why in a second. But if you've noticed this, or if you have thought about writing on this idea for your final paper, then on the one hand, I don't blame you, because it is in some aspects part of the play. But if you've done any kind of research at all, even just looked it up online, so much of the secondary material mentions this idea of the American dream as fundamental to the play. I think students get kind of unnaturally directed in that towards that idea, and so they sort of latch onto it. But I'm going to suggest that you really want to steer clear of it, even though you'll see it show up so many places in terms of whatever research you might do. And my reasoning is simply that the American dream has become this phrase that is attached to the play so easily, like it's about the American dream, as if that kind of says it all. But if we all sat down and compared our definitions of the American dream, A, they might be very different from one another, and B, a lot of it really doesn't apply. So one good example is ideas about wealth. It seems on the face of it that Willy Loman is really concerned about wealth and money and all that kind of stuff. And while I think financial pressures play a major role in terms of family dynamics in that play, they're worried about money on a very fundamental level. It's not ultimately wealth that Willy Loman really wants. It's much more an idea of celebrity. And he never talks about it in these terms, but if you think about his most shining moment, the memory of his being a father to his high school sons, the one moment that really stands out that he mentions is when Biff, the older son, gets to play football at Ebbets Field, this very famous, place in this big championship game that he's going to be in. And the thing that Willy Loman really remembers isn't any aspect of, the actual game, but it's Biff going out onto the field and everybody chanting Loman, right? The name. This, to Willy, is like the height of success. It has nothing to do with wealth or money. It is a form of celebrity, of being known, of not having to know everybody else, but they knowing you. So here's an aspect of the play that if you just say, oh, it's about the American dream, notice how you kind of miss all of this other stuff. So the American dream becomes this blanket statement that almost literally like covers up all of this other more kind of concrete and narrowly focused kind of stuff that's going on in the play. So the short version here is that it's not so much that the American dream, whatever that even means, isn't somehow in the play. It's that usually we can find a much better term to talk about whatever aspect of that dream that we're really interested in. Is it definitions of success? Is it ideas of celebrity? Is it a focus on wealth, which again might be part of the American dream socially in some much more general or abstract sense, but it's not really fundamental to what Willy Loman cares about. In fact, if you even think of the end of the play, where he has this imagined conversation with his brother Ben, because basically he needs somebody to tell him that his idea is a good one, he's going to commit suicide, but he doesn't think of it in those terms. He thinks of it as a final kind of business deal. And it's not necessarily the money from the insurance policy that he thinks he's going to get that he cares about. It's the money that will then go to Biff, or to his sons, primarily Biff as the older more important son in Willie's eyes, so that they can start what? Their own business, the Loman Brothers sporting line, or anything else that has the Loman name. So again, one aspect of the play that's really important is this notion of a legacy or leaving something behind. And Willie doesn't care so much about leaving money behind, some inheritance, but only money so that it could buy or be used to pass on the family name. So it lives in this kind of celebrity status. In fact, ultimately, Willie's impulse to be and stay a salesman isn't that he wants money. He certainly doesn't like being a salesman, it seems. He likes the fact that in his ideal world as a salesman, people know your name. He even talks about dying the death of a salesman, which is where the play title comes from, which is the sense that this guy, Dave Singleman, could just call up people, and because they knew him, that he could transact business just, sort of over the phone or based on his personality, on the fact that people knew his name. So again, it's really not about the money. It's about celebrity, or this definition of success that is really grounded in notions of celebrity or being known. In fact, if you reread the play or just sort of skim through it, you'll notice that on a very regular basis, Willie, even in his flashbacks and of course in the present, is talking about how people know him. They know his name. Whether that's true or not is debatable. But what we need to keep in mind is that it points to basically his drive to be a celebrity. And I keep using that term because I think it's the best one to describe what's happening to Willie Loman, even though it never actually shows up in the play itself, as far as I can remember. It's one of those strange things. It's like maybe the most fundamental theme, but it actually never shows up, that particular term. So the short of it, again, is to really stay away from the American dream as something that you would write about or want to reflect in your research or anything like that. Again, not because aspects of it aren't in the play, but because it just becomes this statement that we use too easily and we miss so much of what's actually going on in the play. The other piece of the play that I think gets missed if you just default to, oh, it's about the American dream and that's the end of it, is the role of family. And it's obvious in terms of Willie, Linda, Biff, and Happy, that nuclear family that's the center of the play. But think about all the other families that are in the play as well. There's Uncle Charlie and Bernard, which, they don't play a major role maybe, but Bernard becomes this ideal of success in Willie's eyes. And of course, Willie wonders to Charlie, like, how did you do it? How did you do it? Willie's always asking, like, what is the secret? What are the right things to do? And of course, Charlie's reaction is just like, I don't really know. It worked out. And that's all I know. Think about the company that Willie Loman works for, the Wagner Company, which is of course named for the family, right? The boss's family name, and that must be just so awful for Willie to have to work in this situation where it's the ideal of what he dreams about, to have that name, that family name, represented in business. And of course, even more than just the family name being represented in the Wagner Corporation, is that it was owned by the father, Wagner, and passed on to the son, who we learn from the play doesn't really care about Willie at all. In fact, he more or less just fires him. He doesn't take him seriously. And again, it's never really mentioned outright, but you can imagine how frustrating it must be for Willie to have to sort of grovel for your job to this kid who is living that familial dream of the family business that Willie would so desperately love to pass on to his sons, Happy and Biff. Biff being the more important son in Willie's eyes simply because he's the older one. The other family that we can't forget about is Willie's own, but not Willie as the father in the family, Willie as the son in the family. So if you think about Willie as a son, his older brother is Ben. So now you can begin to think about parallels between Ben and Willie as this brother set, the older and the younger, and Biff and Happy, this brother set, the older and the younger. And then, of course, one of the most important characters that isn't really in the play is Willie's own father. We're told very briefly just a few things that he made and sold flutes, so he's a kind of salesman of his own. He was this real pioneering, adventuresome spirit. Again, we don't really know how accurate that is exactly, but clearly that mythical, heroic status is how Willie thinks of his father. And in one of the saddest moments in the play, I think, Willie is remembering his own childhood when he's quite young. He's thinking about his father, and he remarks to Ben how great their father was, but he can't quite remember how old he was. And Ben says something like Willie was only 3.5 or 4 years old. And at that point, the father just picked up and headed to Alaska. Where he actually went, we don't know. But basically, Ben has just told his younger brother Willie, when they're adults, that the reality of their childhood is that their father just left them. He abandoned them. And Willie, because he obviously can't confront the reality of that, his response is, again, one of the saddest moments in the play. His response to Ben is that Ben has such a great memory because he can remember how old Willie was at the time. It's so tragic. I mean, that is the heart of the tragedy of the play right there. And of course, we're told just after that, is that Ben himself then takes off after their father. Again, where he actually goes, we really don't know. Most of what Ben says is probably a lie, or at least a half lie. But Willie has this mythic conception of both his father as this heroic pioneer, of Ben as this self-made millionaire, that despite all evidence to the contrary, he firmly believes in these things. Notice that talking about the American dream doesn't really give us access to any of that basic kind of familial tension. And ultimately, why Willie is the way he is, it sounds a little bit corny, but I think it's the truth, is that he simply didn't have a father as a role model. He then didn't have a big brother as a role model. So he grew up to be this guy in desperate need of validation, of someone to tell him that, yes, you're doing the right job, yes, you're doing it correctly. And ultimately, to bring it all back around, why he seeks celebrity the way he does might be simply to fill the void of validation, of being known, that not having a father left, right? Someone to tell him you're doing a good job, or even to tell him, you're not doing a good job, you're not doing the right thing. He had none of that guidance. And so while Willie is a pretty despicable guy in lots of ways, and he'd be a real chore to be around, I'll admit that, I think he's a much more sympathetic character than we necessarily realize, especially if we just write off the play as about the American dream and Willie's misguided and he can't confront reality and blah, blah, blah. Well, I think there's really reasons for that. And Miller, the playwright, gives us a lot of those reasons, even though it doesn't occupy a lot of the play in terms of not the main family with Willie as the father, but as that family once removed, Willie as a son, and the impact of that abandonment that ultimately left Willie just always in search of something. If you think about some of the comments that he and Biff make, they're actually much more alike than different in the sense that they're just trying to find themselves. And it's not because of deep personality flaws, I think, so much as it is the product of their upbringing. Okay, so I'll cut myself off there. And again, just remind that there's lots going on in the play, so try to really focus on something concrete rather than defaulting to the very broad and not very useful theme of the American dream. All right?